Okay, so now I'm going to drive back from Niagara Falls-ish area to Syracuse. It's only a 2-hour drive, so that makes it seem a lot faster than what it took to come here. For some reason, Rochester threw me off a little bit. But, yeah, Buffalo's a little bigger than I thought, and it's the biggest city besides New York City. I didn't know that. I guess I overestimated Albany. And there's a lot of Indians here for whatever reason, because of Canada, I don't know, but a lot of Indian restaurants and stuff like that. Question where I've used this expression somewhat is like the middle class is the real villain. You have to blame the audience, you have to blame, the exuberance. Is like, what, fast food too, but like, what, even though I'm a bit of a minimalist too, it's a bit of a contradiction. Food is really the main luxury, but it's like, let's say you're a minimalist and you sacrifice a lot of things. You sacrifice, sexual things that might cost money and whatever, like in a implied prostitution sense, like how relationships work. But no, it's like, if you sacrifice all that, it'll be like, oh, you lack the ability to do it. Meanwhile, people are pumping out babies like it's nothing, and then complaining, oh, we're struggling to put food on the table. It's like, I'm not telling you not to have them, but you don't get to complain when you do. So it's just a very, very selfish basis, right? Is, oh, like, this should be a pretty straight shot. I'm impressed sometimes how fast it is to drive back from somewhere, because the way I go is sometimes a little roundabout and I take the long way. But then when I go back, like the 6-hour drive back from Boston basically, or Maine even, to New York, to Syracuse is only 6 hours, right? Whereas the drive to get there took, weeks, but obviously I was doing things along the way, but it's just like, that was a very interesting thing. These bridges always make me nervous because I think like, oh, I'm going to accidentally cross into Canada, and I don't want to do that. But no, I got to see Niagara Falls. Was nice. First time since I was a kid I've seen it. A lot of Indians there, a lot of kids there. Nice kind of crowd, but yeah, like, let me expose a few things. Like, they'll be the same people who use the self-checkout for minor convenience. Now that'll put themselves out of a job, and then they'll complain about that. They create their own oppressors. They build up this thing, and then, they'll use AI or things. Like, they don't think. That's what the middle class and average defaults, absolute default. They don't think, and then they'll regret it later. So that's not me acting like, oh, look, I'm superior and smart or whatever. No, anybody can think and be aware. Now, I can't immediately impact that, which is what most people say, oh, they can't impact that. But you do impact it by not doing anything, or by doing the false absolute default that's actually outward. So that's how the normal, quote-unquote state in a society is controlled and contrived and indoctrinated. Like, oh, that's the default, and neutrality or anything else possible in existence is outward instead, right? So you're defined by not. You're defined by not doing something rather than doing something. There's a false absolute default outward thing, like in modern society, like, oh, it's default to support these big globalist monopoly stores like Walmart and Target, and we just concede value to that, and then it just becomes a matter of overcompensation. We just concede that, right? We don't question it, we don't qualify it. There's no actual basis for that. You'll say, oh, like they earned it or something, but even the way in which they earned it could be questioned, built on, forced monopoly, unqualified empirical origin points, certain bypass privileges, monopoly type treatment. But like, if you tried to do the exact same thing that they did as they worked their way up, oh, now it wouldn't work, right? So there's that monopoly over the same process. It'd be illegal now to do what they did to come to the position that they're at now. So that's like the meta. It's almost like a metagaming thing. everybody would say, oh, this character was broken or this ability was broken, but then everybody would use it, and then as soon as it gets nerfed, then everybody uses the next broken thing until it gets nerfed. So it's never really balanced. But it's the same thing here. Like, if you if you do that, what happens is the selfishness, the exuberance, things that are like false absolute default, and people indignantly insist as they do these things that are luxuries and excessive. And again, I'm not shaming that. I'm saying, don't tell me you have credibility. Don't tell me you have any basis of value. You're engaging in folly, favoritism, distraction, and then you're indignantly insisting upon your way of life, which is overextended machination process, non-free, non-inherent, non-truth, non-objectivity, playing into monopolized corporations, stuff like that. So that false default set is like, oh, it'd be outward to not do it. You'd be defined by not doing or reinforcing it. So that shows you that they don't have standards. It's the bread and circuses thing. If they're comfortable, they're at peace, they're gratified, they have no standards at all, they don't care. But now you're gonna perpetuate it, right? Because you're a hedonistic animal and stuff like that. So yeah, Chet is getting clowned, rightfully so. So if you're OKC for the game, 7 performance, 4 points. If you're OKC, I mean, you probably should get rid of him, but now the trade value is going to be low. He's just not that guy at all. And he didn't really have to be that guy, but like, you didn't need much from him, really. That was just embarrassing. Like, that's really one of the worst performances possible, where you just don't even try, you just don't even do anything. But yeah, like the selfish middle class, petty, superficial, controlled by certain things, they kind of crave that, right? So it's zero respect human, because you want to be controlled in the way that you've been controlled and trained like an animal your whole life, which is like appeal to your ego, bypass your critical thinking. So if somebody doesn't do that, oh, that's bad, and now you'll project all the negative things about humanity that you believe or that you would imagine for neutrality. So the one who doesn't overcompensate or bypass your critical thinking is responsible or associated with all of that. The one who's honest or objective, shoot the messenger, right, who's aware of everything, versus, oh, you curate the selective slice out of reality. And so what happens is that you basically are put in a position where, I don't know, but like, let's look at a different concept here, machination process, like curating control, right? Like, what's the difference between Johnny Carson or whatever of the past and people in modern times like social media? It's like, now you just have more freedom to do the same thing. So too much freedom invalidates the process by which you were previously controlled. Kind of like this, social media versus anything. You could do the same exact thing, but because it's social media, it's somehow bad or worse. It makes you realize how every process, therefore, is arbitrary. Like, it's not. Every process is arbitrary, equally arbitrary. It's not. But it's the framing. You got to frame yours to make it seem like something more, even though it's not at all. Like, even compared to amalgam theory, you would have that, like, you're doing all this for these excesses and exuberances that you don't really need, meanwhile other people starve. So is what you're doing really justified? Or again, it's not even that you have to justify that, but then don't pretend to value other people, because you don't, right? If you do anything in excess, so like, you don't value human life inherently, you have some social contrivance hierarchy for which you have incentives and preconceived notions and all this, that's what social contrivance is used as a tool and a reinforcement. So a deliberate lack of doing that could be present. But that's the funny thing too about like the mass collective. They'll project like, oh, lack of ability to social contrive and this and that. Not that maybe somebody isn't as egotistical, shallow, petty, vain, selfish as they are, right? Maybe they don't value things in that manner, as in, you know, like, maybe there's no need for social contrivance. You can be aware of the same thing. Anything anybody can say to you, you can think yourself. Like, there's no ego. They don't have as big an ego as you. They don't have, you know, incentives like you. They're unconditional, neutral. They're at peace. They, you know, they're just, they're just in a position to, you know, project that. It's like, oh, inability to do this thing, not that they're choosing not to do it, not that the act of doing it is egotistical and even like, you know, just incentivized, egotistical, low standards. Even they could be an elitist, like they value something in terms of standard, not the subversive process that has no real criteria behind it. And so, what is that, a Kingdom Hearts billboard? What was that? Yeah, like even the idea of like social contrivance, like, oh, be nice kind of a thing. But be nice in what context? Should you be nice to other people in World War II Germany, or should you maybe be a little bit mean and try to stop that from happening? Should you be nice in reinforcement of China right now, or, you know, in what context should you be nice? That just assumes like this basic value. But if you, and should you be nice to reinforce the dependent over center pretense exuberance of a mass collective middle class, or should you do amalgam theory, where you sacrifice if you truly value people, which would just use as a pretense prop for gratification to reinforce your dependent over center pretense state, that you know, that you're in, that exists as exuberance. And so that was a shorter trip, right? That was fine, not too big of a deal. Here, I feel like listening to some music, so sometimes it fucks up my other headphone, or my other phone, but yeah, like they'll always project their own, like that's why the projection of its non-base of self is used to control them, but it's also how they'll see the world that way, even if it doesn't apply. Like the person who, oh, they can sacrifice everything and they don't care about money or material things or whatever, or sex, or, you know, they could just be indifferent, they could have different priorities, different way of thinking, but they'll still project it because that's the way they're controlled. And that's why neutrality acts as a mirror to the half-mass contrivance state. Like, they'll basically tell you that's how they're controlled, that's how their mind is wired, that's how they've been trained and indoctrinated like the animal that they are. That doesn't mean that's reality or truth. That would imply like one size fits all. Okay, there's a such thing as being asexual. It does exist, right? There are people who are that. So even if there's one asexual person, your preconceived notions and projections go out the window and you realize, oh, so that had nothing to do with them, that you perceive that. You just imagined it. You're just delusional because that's how you're controlled, and that's how you have to perceive the world to reinforce your state. And then that's why it's kind of fruitless to even do this, because it shows you people have minds capable of objectivity too. It's not a unique thing. It's nothing to do with me. No ego. I'm just a vessel for it. But anybody can do it. So it shows you they have an incentive not to do it. You cannot dissuade with reason one came about by desire, is how I said it before. Like, it's just not, you know, people have that selfish incentive not to think, but they still suffer, they still struggle with the conflict of contrivance, which means even if they don't see objective reality, the signs of objective reality and the struggle with it is still present in their actions and observable practice. So you say like, oh, your life is a sure thing and you're very confident and whatever, it's absolute, right? So there's no need to think or be objective, just go along with it. But meanwhile, you have to distract yourself with folly, favoritism, and escapism. So things that don't matter, don't have impact on your life. Why would you need to do that? Or you need religion, or you need, drugs, or you need something that would indicate that it isn't an absolute state the way you're making it seem. So that's why people compete over like the appearance basis of like how the same process, but over and over we compete over the appearance instead of understanding and realizing that you're basically like, oh, you should curate and compete over the appearance, contest of contrivance, who can best appeal to your senses and your ego and your preconceived notions and your whatever, versus just the inherent objective reality. You'd be aware of the larger process, so it'd be like, it doesn't matter what the specifics are. It would be like, oh, that makes a person desensitized, but that just means they're aware of more things. Your appreciation or value or standard shouldn't require to censor reality and state, even if it's in service of a globalist machination process, whatever, overextended empirical, unqualified authority, like even through our history, certain regimes and stuff, you'd be doing it in service of that, but somehow collective pretense, it just doesn't really make sense. Really, there's the one minimalist could be a piece anywhere versus half-mass human function is not a piece anywhere. Or again, it requires like this curated bread and circuses, overcompensation, excesses, exuberance. They don't even know what they want. So every that's kind of what a lot of those things are. They're in this, like, you think, oh, why do people drink and smoke and do drugs and stuff, or even folly favoritism? It's not because, the raw difficulty of a task, like, oh, they work hard. If your work was really fulfilling or satisfying, or again, if everything you did was concerned with your survival, you'd be more at peace in that state. So because it's overextended, because there's cognitive dissonance, you can't think about your state is more the issue. It's not about the difficulty of doing what you're doing. You do it and you don't think while you're doing it in the name of functionalism, but even when you're not doing it, you still can't think about your state. You have to distract yourself. So what credibility would that unthinking animal have? Right? You behave like an animal, so then you'll be treated, your result will be like an animal. You'll be trained and controlled like the animal that you're behaving like. Instead of, at least when you're not doing zero-sum function, shouldn't you think and be objective, because that's what defines humanity and separates us from animals, is our ability to think. But apparently, it becomes the sole enemy of society, like where you try to subvert it at every turn. Where it is, his comeback clutch music. Is 1 through 49, so now we go to exit 40. 116 miles, holy shit. This will basically be the whole thing then. Right, like 2 hours. Kid Flash, Hood Chris Smooth music. He always would use like auto-tune and shit. In kind of a more funny way, because he's not really a singer, not pretending to be. But yeah, it shows you like what people value is incredible. It's kind of arbitrary, random. love that seatbelt use required. Like, where isn't it? I guess in Vermont it might not be. Vermont has some really relaxed restrict. Like, they don't have tolls there. A lot of good things actually about Vermont, at least from an outsider perspective. Almost like they're desperate to have people come there otherwise. Versus like New York City and stuff, they'll be more strict because they almost don't want people there. There's already too many people. So the collective overextension fallacy of like, the more people there are, the less free you are, even with the machination process to try to balance it out, because that's like a net sum result. But yeah, I think about the social contrivance element the way that, it's, you have to dumb everything down to the lowest common denominator, so it's not a credible basis for the infinite objective mind. Sort of personalized thought is a weak basis because anybody can think anything, so it's not about that. Like, oh, you actually use your brain instead of, oh, you're just reactionary initial mind and human function. Again, there's a pseudo-functional basis, but when everything is in excesses and exuberance and in service of unqualified globalist monopoly empirical state, it doesn't exactly hold much credibility because, like, oh, you have to do this, but you don't have to do it. You're doing it because of the excesses, the possession that you yourself create, selfish kind of thing, for excesses, for exuberance, for, again, in service of human-made, artificial, controlled monopoly basis. And so people don't have standards, and they're willing to sell out very easily. Their minds, their bodies, everything. They're just slaves to established authority. That's it. Like, no will, no freedom, no nothing. They're nothing, no credibility. Just evidently, that's what you see for red circuits of comfort. And then they're trained. It's kind of, they go to karma, the semi-acme specification, but it's not really what you'd want to see from it. Is like that then people are trained and tamed and controlled by their own hedonistic, false absolute thing that they're never at peace with, always possessive, always insecure, right? This false absolute value to specify and to be controlled by it. That would be, I've never seen a Cracker Barrel that isn't on like a highway type thing, so do they even have, I guess that's off the exit though. Never mind. Like, they're usually like right on the highway, like. Yeah, people will be mindless sheep until it's too late. So it shows you like a lack of desire on their part. That's why it's pointless, because it's like why people believe religion. It has nothing to do with logic and reason. It has human beings are not credible. They have incentives. They have, they want to believe in the same way you want to be ignorant. Red circuses. Some of it is like a symptom versus disease fallacy of like. You're still reacting to the same cognitive dissonance, but you're not acknowledging it. You're saying like, oh, you want to distract yourself and you like sports and you like whatever. But the reason why those things appeal to you is because you're in a subversive state where you're not free. So that's not really what you would want if you were, but it's your coping mechanism. So you're dealing with the symptom, not the disease. That you're not free, not in your mind, not in your physical self. At least if you were aware of the nature of the process then. But then you wouldn't go along with it. The false absolute specific. They're never at peace with themselves, so they project outward externality. And that projection is sort of telling too, like, I don't know how to explain it. They're so controlled by certain things that that's all they see. There's some means to make me. this is a great like moment of there's like a dirty look that one of my characters gives to somebody else. I'll just explain it vaguely. Like this unconditional absolutist or minimalist kind of character who sacrifices a lot, and you know they're doing things genuinely just unconditionally, right? They're just doing them. They don't even want credit, they don't want ego, they don't want anything. And then this other person comes along, right, and kind of invents rules and says, oh, what you're doing isn't allowed for blank reason, even though that doesn't apply. They keep trying to change the goalpost, but they can still control it somehow. And they just give them this look of like, you know, disgust. So basically, that person has an incentive in service of some power structure that's going on. The person doing the unconditional thing has no incentive, right? So it's still an incentive facing a non-incentive. So they have to project to try to control. But yeah, even if you argue like a zero-sum means privilege type fallacy, you'd be like, oh, the only reason why you do something then is because of zero-sum means. So you have the incentive, so it doesn't exactly make you very credible. So still the one with, oh, the supposed privilege to be objective is more credible because they at least have the choice, whereas you don't have the choice to go along with anything, you'll sell out, right? Which you don't necessarily sympathize with. Stimuli preservation creates that, or which is an unqualified state, sort of self-fulfilling. If you're aware of everything or objective like that versus the specific projections that people have to be controlled, or the only way that they think, or what's necessary for their incentive, selective kind of basis. The ego basis is projected because it's a basis to control you, necessary to control you in the way that, like, what if it doesn't apply? Like, again, the zero-sum realization. The minimalist would be like, they don't want anything anyway, they don't care. They just want to be free and in their natural state as much as possible and uninhibited. So there's no ego in anything because it's all just the same zero-sum process. And the absolutists would want to do it as efficiently as possible just for the sake of doing it, to remove the need to do it anymore. So there's still no ego in doing that. But the competition assumes intent. Say, oh, look, I'm better at doing this thing than other people, or you have more money or something. But that assumes that they want it, which you can't do. Whether people realize it or not, it's not a zero-sum race. Like, clearly people are in certain positions because they don't care, because they have other priorities, because whatever the case may be. So, you know, people overextend themselves, and they're tamed and trained like animals by stimuli acme specification. It's a good framework. I mean, people do it to themselves, kind of. The stimuli acme is pretty strong, very powerful. They have to appeal to their own hedonistic self-interest, right? by social media. Oh, social media is bad. Even if you were to do the same exact thing that people do on social media in real life, but like, oh, then that makes it fake. Just because it makes you aware of it. Bro's getting old school RuneScape ads here. Fucking, I'm listening to music. Like nothing can be like a deliberate preference. It must all be assuming intent, projection, false duality, zero sum, simulacrum. So not only would the middle class kind of assumption be selfish and egotistical, but it would assume that of others. Nobody can be. So it reveals and exposes their selfishness if somebody's unconditional. Fallacy, permission, fallacy, privilege. They have no will, no measure, no standard, no basis, no credibility, nothing. They're just empty husks of flesh that just, use gratification as a way to reinforce a non-choice reaction dependent over extended machination process, globalist, empirical basis. Like, they're nothing, right? There's nothing behind it. You couldn't explain it if you were. So that's why it becomes an enemy of thought. It's absolute, but just don't think about it. And you have to drink and do all these subversive things that would hurt your credibility, versus at least being aware of it and objective and not preserving it through the simulacrum. Those are at least the marks of credibility of being objective. Is like, at least you're aware of it, have cognitive distance with it. You're not vouching for the state. You have inhibition about doing it. You try to minimize doing it. You won't preserve the simulacrum. You won't perpetuate the process. You'll try to qualify it first, vouch. Bro's gonna end up in LeBron territory here, Akron, Ohio. So yeah, it's about 100 miles. Somewhere here when we would cross Rochester. In fact, we might already kind of be doing that. Music is a good example of that too, like a reactionary basis. Like, just kind of go along with whatever's there and established. You lack the imagination or the mental freedom to think of it yourself, and then you realize it's sort of arbitrary because, like, just because something is established doesn't make it credible or valuable, but that's what you react to. Let's watch this. Okay, pretending to be mean to clients, ranking my boss. Lost her hair. Yeah, like social contract is used as a tool in service of some monopoly element there, and hindsight is 2020 with the OKC Thunder. I wouldn't say they're overrated. I mean, their other best player was hurt. People jump on the chat, obviously played like garbage, but I wouldn't say that means that they're overrated. It just means that he should play a little better. But no, you're missing your other stars. People are being too harsh on that, and it was still a close game. Like, they're really, really great, but just a lot of hate for the free throws and stuff. So again, they're not a big market team, so there wouldn't be the incentive by the league in the same way with some teams like Lakers and stuff. It's like the lack of self-awareness or accountability, but what people value is the same thing that they would ridicule. Like, they see the creation of it, basically, right? The uncanny valley. They want their awareness to be bypassed, but they want to be controlled by it, but they don't want to be aware that they're being controlled by it. So, like, they see something being created, like a social media post. Oh, that's stupid. Look at this guy recording on his phone. What a dumbass. But then they'll watch that same video, right, and like it, and so... We've edged Canada as about as much as you possibly can with Vermont and with this now. But yeah, like that cynical projection, when it doesn't apply, reveals the artifice of their control. Like, what if it doesn't apply? Then what? It just shows you how they're controlled, right? That their minds are not capable of thinking anything else. Bro, this guy's going too fast. He's going at just the right speed where it's hard to overtake him. It shows you how much people are controlled by half-mass functionalism, zero-sum means, stimuli acme, subversive. Like, they're all needless things that it'd be hard to take a contrivance state seriously, because you don't really need any of those things, but you're forced to get them through the channels of some middleman empirical thing. But again, neutrality is a false negative, it's projected, it's something else. Both ends of the state. The only place I haven't been now basically is New York City in a meaningful way. ego will be projected even where there's none. So as a basic control, or assuming that, what if it doesn't apply? Or again, what if it's elitist, higher standard? What if it's, don't extract the ego from anything, it's all zero sum anyway. All it takes about it, everything is just freedom or thought or experience or, this, even zero sum means, the same basis by which you would work for everything is for zero sum means, like money and stuff, would be the same way that it would invalidate the process of the contrivance state that you're in. Self-awareness and thought are the enemy there, so. Unconditional non-incentive is negative versus emphasis, pretense, ego appeal. So it shows you people don't actually have a standard criteria. They just want their own ego to be stroked and stuff like that. Rather than they have some incentive. Over like superficial things and unnecessary things, so like the inhibition versus entitlement, everything's inhibited and monopolized, but somehow it's like, oh, it'd be your fault, but like society makes you that way, or they'll try to make you weak and reliant and not allow you to be free, so then it's like, oh, you need them, but you've been made weak by them. Your potential has been stifled by them. You've been reduced to the lowest common denominator, animal, trained, collective. And then you can overcompensate still for that, but it's not very credible because people fear even the potential of each other and things like that. That's why you can defer, assuming this is a kind of absolutist thing. Oh, they might defer in youth or otherwise, like, okay, maybe they know something I don't, maybe I'll, defer. But then you realize they really don't. They're just, right, it's just arbitrary, but you held back, and that falsely validates them because they prey on it because their unqualified state requires that. But it's like, there was never any credibility. You just were held back and you even deferred. You're defined by your reaction to contrivance. Right, the inhibition of contrivance. And so what happens is that you, you basically let yourself be controlled, and people are never at peace with anything. Basically, they need constant overcompensation. But you got to realize, let's say those overcompensations didn't exist, then what would you be? You wouldn't be this half-assed human function in modern times, false gratified, false moral, whatever. But it's more than that. Like, you would have not been in quite the same subversive state. So, like, what is really a luxury becomes a necessity somehow. It becomes treated like that. So it's all excesses and exuberance and person isn't allowed, and it would lead often to non-contrivance. Really not a bad drive at all. Just to think about that is 2 hours for that amount of distance, from central New York to effectively Albany would be 2 hours by that metric, which I think is a little bit more, but effectively the same distance. Rochester is here, so that means I guess Rochester and Buffalo are closer than I think. Define my externality, they're reactive, they're trained on sort of rule by mission protocol, and there's like a foot fetish. Oh, here we go again. It'll be my next multi video. Okay, I'm not even gonna say it, dude. Forget it. There's like a tie-in. People are so dumb, you almost have to explain things like that, though. I love how that's my most viewed video, though. It sort of proves something, and it proves the simulacrum right there. People would rather watch that than anything else, like whether because of the thumbnail or something else. either you're, the collective lowest common denominator takes pride in that, the initial basis, versus wouldn't you rather think more or be aware of more by the same measure? Like, you'd rather have less because you can relate to others in their lessness. Like, that's collective gratification. Like, everything's always unqualified and accountable and conditional, the way that I explained it before, absolutist kind of perspective. So whatever, I don't feel like even explaining it again. There's like incentives to not see the truth or barriers to it, whatever collective control state that you're in, right? There's certain incentives built into that, the impure bias perspective that you have to have in a functionalist state. The absolutist would always see people's potential, and the minimalist would always see their inherent nature. That's the best way I can explain it. So the minimalist sees inherent man and what they can do or do without, or how they naturally are, right? And the absolutist sees their potential between the two. Neither of them would accept the half-mass human function state that you're in. They know, oh, that's not your true self, and you're constantly struggling against it, putting on pretenses, appearances, whatever. So it's just a show, and you're trying to compete over a myopic, contest of contrivance. And then the absolutist seeing the potential would be like, you should be more weary of one another because you know that your potential is so high, limitless, but also the potential to control, the potential to deceive, right, all that, but also absolutist measure. I love to see the half-mass functionalists have to attribute to folly thing. Oh, like somebody has main character syndrome, ego, whatever, permission. As if you couldn't just value something normally. Like, as you couldn't be free. You have to attribute it only to fiction because that's the only time you're allowed to be free. Or you have to, say, oh, that's like in that movie or that show or something. You can't just say, like, oh, that's like human nature that is inherent and capable of potential. But we're not allowed to do that, so we only are able to see it or perceive it in fiction. Everything's a false absolute half-mass thing. Right, like why favoritism is the last refuge. That's why in the observable practice, you can still objectively see the nature of the process and the contrivance that controls you. And the reason why is because, right, you're still reacting to it. So it's like, you would seem to vouch for the state, but then you would, everything's just ego perception, some pettiness, some praying, no concern with actual truth or objectivity or reality. It's all some selective myopic who can compete and achieve like the better illusion of a false absolute contrived state, and you get hierarchy props and stuff like that for it. Or can we actually be objective and just seek like finality and truth to something that has no relation to the self, aside from not impurely insisting upon contrive and state purely because you're part of it. That bumpy road in Maine that was so shitty. I was actually scared my tire's gonna pop or something. Like, it's just rocks. You might think, oh, that's naturally occurring or that's good, but like, that's man-made too. Like, I'd rather just drive on the ground than on rocks. Like, pavement's different, but like, those rocks are gonna be sharp and jagged and, you know, pierce your tire. Just let me drive on the flat ground. How about that? Which you could say it wouldn't be flat naturally necessarily, but I don't know, it seemed like a hazard. It's 60 miles, so there must be more after I exit. It's like an hour 15 trip. Yeah, like everything arbitrary, reactionary, subversive, but there are those who take it seriously, selectively, and there are those who are aware of it. So, oh, it's your fault for being aware of it, and that's projected to you. Not that it applies, but you're just being objective, and they're not. They're non-based of self, you know. Like, let's look at a concept here of like, if you're using creative stuff, like, do you appeal to the stimulacme, or it'll be prose, like everything that isn't what's projected as incentive is just a front to achieve the incentive? What if it's the opposite? What if I'm, you know, like, for example, somebody objective, oh, they're using the stimuli acme to reveal the truth of something, like, for example, how you're controlled by it, but it's projected instead as, oh, you're trying to do it or value it or use it. Like, they take it seriously at face value versus, oh no, it's just a tool to be used. let's take one concept here, like the minimalist would view possessions are just a means to control you. Possessions aren't something actually good or necessary. It's just a way to control you. You don't really need much of anything, right? You would need some zero-sum sustenance, but that's about it. Like, and even that's an exuberance and excessive, and the whole irony of like what you eat is unhealthier than what you would get yourself in nature, but because of the mass overextended collective thing, you do that. So, and I love that. Like, oh, you'll pay extra for some, more natural thing, but like it doesn't make sense because it's a privilege, or you have to pay extra to get something that would otherwise be free in nature, because nature isn't free anymore. The thing about the implication of that, is that to protect you? Like, do you think the system really cares about you? Or is it, it's just because they monopolize it and laws are in service of corporations ultimately, and you're controlled by your mere potential, not what you actually do, right? Those used to herd people like sheep that they are. It becomes clear when you look at history, like, your situation is not unique. It's curated by people, but you somehow take it seriously. But yeah, like freedom and variable and self-actualization and stuff like that exposes the contrivance that they take seriously and that they're controlled by. So somehow a bad thing has to be projected or whatever, but it's like, it's arbitrary, it's stupid. So like you could be doing it to mock them, or just like, okay, this is what they value and they actually take it seriously even though it's dumb, and look at me be a human variable and self-actualize, which is a false absolute half-mask necessary to control and create a hierarchical basis in a subversive overextended empirical state. Like, it's a pretty simple concept, but yeah, like, why would there be any ego and objectivity or whatever? Because it's just the objective reality. It doesn't, that's the whole definition, that it doesn't benefit anything. It is annoying to have to explain it, but because then it seems like an outward position that you're taking, and it defines you, defined by non, once again, like, because the contrivance state is false absolute, outward, inherent, contrivance response. What you can't joke about shows you what you're controlled by, in terms of, humans being used as currency pretense, like, to reinforce a specific contrivance state, selectively applied, dependent over standard pretense, non-true value, remove the need, self-created measure, people overextend their hedonistic obsession is interesting too. Right? It shows you the human ego takes everything and warps it, but then you become controlled by it. The same measure, same process, stimuli acme. Just the way that you can be controlled by it. So non or objectivity, absolutist awareness will be projected as that. That's what they'll see. Because that's all that they define themselves by, or that's all they see. What would the half-mass human function hedonist see? The stimuli acme preserver see? What would they see? They would see the stimuli acme. Oh, that must be projected. That must be the way that they're projecting. Nor would it go about it in an artificial way to overextend the way that they're so keen on doing themselves. It would be direct, or it would be to the point, or it would remove the need. Minimalist or absolutist or open, but that's all they can see because that's what they value. Highest base of value, basically the definition of the stimuli acme right there. But yeah, that's part of like the social contrivance, long-form philosophy, like fallacy of the inability to dump something down enough to people. How is it still Rochester? How? What? Well, it doesn't mean this thing. Right there, right? That's where the absolutist would have that other perception of like everything is used to reinforce the state, but they would see it deeper, like, oh, you value your family, you care about your family, that's why you reinforce this globalist monopoly that turns human beings into animals, human functions. Well, what if your family is all of humanity? What if you're not selfish and possessive and reactionary, nearness postulate, non-choice reaction like that? What if you care about all people everywhere all the same? Then what do you do? Now it's not about you and your comfort and your bread and circuses. It's about that measure of amalgam theory. The greatest validation there is the need to do this in the first place. Like, it's not about the individual, of course, the ego projection framing. The reason why somebody would be objective is because of blank. Oh, some, whatever it might be, pseudo privilege or pseudo, modern machination process allows people to be free. Like, that's a bad thing, even. But, like, not getting to the truth of the matter, somehow personalizing it. Use your possessions and your selfishness, your nearness, family, whatever, to reinforce this whatever state you're in. Could be World War II, Germany, China, versus you sacrifice it because you value everybody, everywhere, amalgam theory. Not for ego gratification, not for credibility, but because that's actually what you value. It's supposedly necessitates overextension, human functionalism. You can point to your bread and circuses, but you'd rather have one free person than a million overextended, bred the circus as slaves, human functions. You have like age and finality there. So again, absolutist, you could live every day like you're going to die tomorrow, but you wouldn't be allowed to do that because you'll get arrested or whatever for whatever you might do. But it shows you all pretense gratification is time-based. Like, if you really were dying tomorrow, then you genuinely wouldn't care, or that's why older people are trained and indoctrinated like that, or like they're framed like that. By being neutral, you reflect back the nature of the contrivance and how people are controlled. And just by being neutral and objective, right, unconditional, you reveal the artifice of contrivance, how it uses a pretense of value to control and compete and to create a hierarchy. You know, you'd pretend to value other people, but then you reward these globalist monopolies. Yeah, like everything's projected in a certain way, like quality favoritism, or people have to like personify everything to something, specify it, instead of just seeing the inherent objective larger process. So the objective one, let's say they're alone or they don't have those possessive or incentive. False meaning in hedonism, self of animals into nature's way of trying reproduction, hedonistic acts. That's your own ego gratification right there. Not actually a credible basis. Certainly not to outwardly insist, right? Nobody's stopping you from doing it. But then you're vouching for the state that you didn't choose, that you didn't create. That's the real result. Like, you want to ask how you get to a certain state that's treated as a false absolute default. There's no self-awareness, there's no measure, there's no plan. You could be aware of the nature of the process, but people are depressed, quote unquote, that's often what it is. You're realizing the cognitive dissonance of a contrived state. It's not just a zero-sum thing. Again, people require very little. Maybe you require overcompensations for the cognitive dissonance, but you're not free to even acquire anything. So like that subversive state where you're being trained like an animal is not natural. It's only natural that you should be arguably depressed about it. So frankly, the absolutists just wouldn't put up with it. Sure, they could die sooner. Sure, they could punish them. Do what you want. They're not going to preserve the stimuli. They're not going to do it. That's their own victory against it. That's the best they can do. Because think about how hard that fight is to have, that we've done before again and again. You're arguing against people's own ego, own gratification, own pleasure that they're trained by. That they're taught to specify, that they're taught to, even limerent siphons projection. But it'd be pointless because you couldn't explain it any other way. That by observing a process, it'll be projected onto you, very calculated. But the whole time, the absolutist observing all this, it doesn't matter because you can't do anything about it. But you're almost doing it just to, like doing the proofs of the stimuli. I could do it, but it doesn't matter. Because people are trained a certain way that they can't see it. So something is controlled in a certain way, and then you acquiesce to those terms. So there was a certain objective, unconditional trump card that you would have that I won't even say what it is, but that proves the objectivity right there. Right, that at the end of the story, we could say, wait a minute, all those projections, wait a minute, there's a certain label, a certain term I could use, and then you'd see, oh, wait a minute, how could that be? You wouldn't be able to explain it then. Right. Yeah, the incentives of others are so strong, they'll outwardly insist, project, even unconditional, and control it. Kind of the ravenous selfishness of, again, middle class contrivance, whatever. Of an impure incentive to everything where people are not objectively observing things, they're always trying to reinforce. Again, pretend you had zero-sum means and excess or whatever you need, or pretend you didn't require anything. Then what would be the value then versus this conditional control that half-masked by the inherent? people realize their own inherent nature, their own potential, their own freedom variable, they'll never put up with a half-assed state. Because it even assumes something like, okay, you must not have any self-control, or you must be a wild animal, whatever. If you're not at peace with your own nature, you're not in control of it, not aware of it, is what you're basically saying. So then if that's true, then you should always be weary, and like, I don't know, it creates a weird dynamic. That like, you must have a pretty low opinion of yourself and people if you are inhibited in a half-assed state, but then somehow there's some ego gratification, it's like some competition hierarchy, so you kind of deny human nature, you're not aware of it. But yeah, like, just look at music as proof of the stimuli. How many lyrics and stuff have to do with that? Yeah, like time as a measure of the absolute is not money or means or stimuli acme. A measure people, and then they end up doing this hedonistic thing, and then they find meaning in their own inherent hedonism, and then they find in stimuli acme preservation, ego insistence, collective thing. So human ego is a tool of control that way, in the sense that, you know, human ego, like just self-insistence, but never amalgam theory, never sacrifice, always. We'd rather create another person than to take care of the ones who are already here, assuming that you value people inherently, which you don't. You value yourself, non-base of self, not credible, no basis for structure, outward insistence. That discussion also comes up. Like, it's hard to explain. They'll see it later, or maybe they'll never see it, but you would have seen it all along. Like, it wasn't about the result or the externality or anything. Right, the outcome, the acknowledgement of others, you don't get value from that externality, you get it from the, like, even, okay, what I'm doing right now, duh. Like, I would do this with 0 viewers. I would do the Absolutist philosophy debate because I'm not doing it for, I don't want attention or money or credit or likes, or it doesn't matter. You're doing it because it's objective truth or reality, or because it has value, it has whatever worth it has. So, because it needs to be done, vessel of objectivity, whatever. So, it wouldn't matter. That's the thing. It doesn't matter. You're doing it because of the value it has to you, or what you see, or what it is. Not because of others. Right. You go 24 miles here, but then we have a lot more to go, actually, after that, apparently. people don't think and then they regret it later. Non-accountable stuff like symbiotic preservation. It just defines all of existence and overextension of reality. That's all. It's not really that important to think about, but you'd reinforce what's already established, non-choice reaction, never self-actualizing. What is this song? Birds of a Feather. Do I know this? Why is this in my YouTube mix when I've never heard of it? Dancing on a chair the whole song. Like, what is this? I feel like certain things are valued just for exposure, preconceived thing. You might think there's a reason why it appeals in the first place, but that's kind of the way I can describe it. Okay, this is like censorship fallacy. Like, oh, something's only popular because it's exposed to a mass number of people, and you'll say, well, but there's a reason why that appealed to them versus anything else. You're right about that, but it'll be one of the many things that's allowed by contrivance, whereas certain things will not be allowed. So it'll be censored, right? Meaning like something profound or meaningful, or no, it's something that would actually change people's lives in society. Like, oh, it would actually break your illusion of everything's false absolute and then censor everything else. But if you do that, then right, instead of, oh, it's just to reinforce or distract from the contrivance state instead of actual measure, to the red circus type thing. So it's the inability of somebody to reinforce that contrivance, right? Like, or not that they're not as selfish as you, etc., etc. But even beyond that, it's things that I normally would listen to, it should do. Like, everything is zero-sum process, so absolutists want to get it over as quickly as possible, do it as efficiently as possible, to just do it, there's never a reason to stop. No zero-sum gratification, self-interest is all zero-sum. If it's worth doing, do it absolutely. If it's not worth doing, don't do it at all. No ego insistence used to control you in the middle theory or whatever it is. You would take gratification in that. It's not about you. You're not selfish. Unconditional sacrifice. So that's the specified kind of selfishness. Oh, you're supposed to value people in your immediate environment versus valuing all people everywhere. Or you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to sacrifice. There's like an inability to do it, not that you have a different form of value. Ego gratification, subversive kind of superficial things, vain. What if somebody, they value amalgam theory, they value something else, inherent objective reality, non-unconditional, neutral, absolutist measure, whatever it is. You're not at peace with, not aware of, so you have to kind of be overcompensate for it. Midnight City, I'm just listening to random songs. Everything, or experience as much as possible, and don't don't dig into one thing, because that's just a means to control you. Specifying, right, as much variety as possible. People that are tame, trained animals, whether it be by folly, favoritism, you wouldn't be like this tame, trained animal in a half-assed way. Capital City, Safe and Sound. Some of these songs I'll know, but I won't know them by the name. Like, no, this. Yeah, people value their own comfort and like convenience over standards. They wouldn't sacrifice their relative comforts or anything for a standard or a measure. They're controlled by things that they're reacting to, influenced by. They're not aware of them. It didn't go insist upon them, associate them with their identity, ego, versus the free, objective, human variable inherent. Just a zero-sum thing. Like, oh, you just don't get it. Emperor has no clothes thing. Appeal to your ego enough that you're willing, that you desire to be controlled by it. You're still controlled by it, but you have to make it, oh, you desire to be controlled by it. You want to be controlled by it. The origin point fallacy is there as well. Itself, like, well, yes, under that circumstance, it's already established that you didn't choose or create. It would seem that you rely on them, and now it's a matter of overcompensation or whatever, but it's unqualified. So your ability to tolerate or gratify or overcompensate is irrelevant. You could do the same with any state in service of World War II Germany, machination, always better than the last technology era. So okay, Van's Joy, Van's Joy Riptide. What are all these normie songs in my mix? It's like this competition over that hierarchy specification, not based on self-ego gratification. What about the unconditional basis? Well, that's bad because it reveals the artifice and superficiality and selfishness of people. So it must be the inability to do it versus non-desire, else measure, amalgam theory. Okay. Or like, again, there's no need for that ego gratification because you're aware of the nature of the process where you have a measure versus they don't, so they require constant overcompensation. So the one who's at peace or neutrality or absolutist measure would define action and impact and everything like that as value. and doesn't need social contrived gratification, whereas those people who are in a false absolute state require constant reinforcement through externality. People compete over their myopic fragments of their potential, but what if it's just selfishness, or again the ego gratification that they need reinforcement and outward insistence gratification because their process isn't sound, that they're not aware of it, they're not at peace with it, versus the one who is doesn't need that. So social contrivance is a subversive tool of reinforcement. People compete over their own ego, pre-con base, preconceived basis, stuff like that. Lowest common denominator, whatever, hierarchy. Conceding a non-vice subversive state, no basis for structure, no basis for outward insistence, assume intent. But they compete over that ego subversive basis, which means they're conceding a state which is not of value and is instead about overcompensation, distraction, bypassing, appeal to ego. Not an actual objective inherent standard that's credible or consistent. Right, they're conceding a non-value subversive state. So again, they're more concerned with appearances that maintain the illusion that they're controlled by than objective inherent reality. Kind of like what they see is not. What people would see collectively, mass scale, would not be necessarily what is there, what is actually present. They would see what they need to see to reinforce their contrived state. False duality, preconceived notions. They project it even if it's not there, it doesn't apply, because that reveals the artifice of everything else. Just like how unconditional neutral basis amalgam theory would reveal the artifice and incentive of everybody, or selfishness of everybody, but also like the privilege of empires that you reinforce versus supposed privilege of one. But the measure basis of amalgam theory, non-ego basis, would be present there either way. Okay, so I'm a little confused by this. We go here, but Radio had no surprises. Yeah, Oswego. We're nowhere near fucking Oswego, man. What are you talking about? There's no highway exit that even goes to Oswego. I don't think directly. That is the exit we're taking, though. I don't know why. Yeah, you're like forced to tolerate and react to a contrived state in a certain way. least it wasn't raining the whole way, I guess. So you have that everything's incentivized projected thing, but what if it's a different measure? They value time, they value outcome theory, something like that, versus zero-sum means or semiotic mean. But what if they sacrifice those things or they use them to reveal something else? That was really not a bad drive. I mean, really, really not. Really, even marketing takes on that form of like, people are so exposed to so many things that they end up like, it becomes about attention, like over stimulation kind of thing. I don't know what kind of route is taking me on. This shouldn't have been necessary. Yeah, it shows you even that hedonistic, selfish basis of the semiotic me, that people find the highest value in that. Which, again, isn't necessarily even a bad thing, but it lacks in credibility. Yeah, they require like ego gratification, reinforcement, regurgitation, but that only assumes that you vouch for the state, and not in finality, not in the absolutist way. True value. Either you would do it to the fullest and remove the need, or, create the next layer of Darwinistic basis by which your children will then reinforce mindlessly like the sheep of today. So gratification is used as a tool at half-mast, like ego gratification, to be a trained animal in a half-mast state that was created by people who didn't do that, who did it by force, who did it whatever, some other way. Morality is a plaything of conquerors for the descendants to squabble. But yeah, like, you can't have a deliberate rejection of a basis or some other form of value. It's always like, the inability to keep this illusion or do this thing. inequality, favoritism, etc. would be the lens through which you have to show something, because it's only what's allowed, everything else is censored. You're in a non-value subversive state by force, non-choice reaction, and then, you'll be defined by the reaction to that unqualified empirical authority, false, inherent, contrivance response. And so therefore, it's trying to dictate the outcome, but it's a little bit too obvious if you actually have a brain, which of course people do not use, the brains that they apparently possess. And so that's the nicest way, I guess I can say, observe it, but it really doesn't matter, I guess. Again, people have that active lack of value. It's a self-actualizing element. You could value it if you wanted, but you choose not. Why am I on this road? Like, why? There's never a time where I should ever have to use this road. I guess something was closed because of a detour, so maybe that was why, but like the exit 34, or route 34. We get one concept, like what is fake is like, being aware of the nature of the process, but still playing into the lowest common denominator that people value. That's fake because you're not actually that dumb. You're just pretending to be that dumb, I guess. It's a very annoying road that I ended up on. Okay, 10 miles, that should be pretty much it. But like, everything is excess and convenience and stuff. So therefore, you shouldn't try to say remove the need, not be subservient to the way throughout history that people often are. Takes it all by ABBA. Now we're getting out of our realm here. How the fuck do we get this from my mix of what I listen to? Not even anything against it, but it has nothing to do with my, I don't know. That would be a funny edit. The song starts, I don't want to talk, and she pauses, and it's like, just end the song. I don't want to talk, and that's the end of the song. Right? Like, okay, you don't feel like talking or singing, so fuck it. Yes, it's like you defer to this subversive state of social contrivance, and that it turns into competition hierarchy. But if you're aware of the large process, it wouldn't matter. Ego, overcompensation basis that you're controlled by is somehow, it's subversive against merit. How the mediocre rule the masses, right? The way I always say. Or like again, the egotistical basis, something is more impressive because people do it or not. That whatever. Versus is not some process or some aided by technology or now made by AI. They'll condemn that, but what we do now is all based on technology anyway. Right, in some other form, so we just accept the last layer, oppose the new layer, and like the appeal to the lowest common denominator is like, well, it's only necessary because of their subversive state in the first place, and then it's like, oh, that's somehow your desire, preference that you're defined by. You're reacting to that controlled state, like where nothing else is allowed, basically. The nature of the same process that people value or controlled by, oh, that's uncomfortable or something, ego, whatever, but it's the same thing or whatever. You know, the same way that people are glorified in a nearness postulate basis, like, oh, look at this guy, pillar of the community, and then they turn into a monster globalist kind of empire that goes against those same things, kills the mom and pop store. So you build somebody up because of what they do locally, and then they use that to turn into this thing, right, that goes well beyond it. In the modern overextended world, it's hard to take that seriously, right, when everything's already overextended, but you supposedly value people, but you really don't because you sell them out so easily for overextended corporate stuff. But yeah, you were never allowed to be objective or true value basis, not about ego, not about incentive, but just about the sheer reality of it, truth and objectivity and standard. You were always structure reduced, subversive state. Let's see what we'll get next, dude. Fucking Coldplay Clocks, which I don't actually know that off the top of my head. Yeah, the only songs you would have heard, Imagine Dragons or Viva La Dida and a couple other, or Lost is a good one. Lost is really good. Just because I'm losing doesn't mean I'm lost. Oh, I know this, obviously. Coldplay's whole style of lyrics is always like something, like some regretfulness or some, bittersweet kind of thing. like everything will be attributed to the ego. Like either people want to project and say they want something for their own ego, even if it doesn't apply, like the old I have a boyfriend effect, or oh, they must be this or that, lack the ability, not that they don't have that incentive or care or whatever. Everything in the modern day in service of some overextended empirical thing. But what if you don't value those things, and there's no base to control you? You can't be free, not unconditional. Zero-sum means validation, even if because you're in a bread and circuses state, so it's kind of vouched for by the structure. Showing like a live performance in this, but the song itself isn't a live performance, obviously. Yeah, just remember the level to which you defer your inherent objective potential, that you have to dumb things down to the lowest common denominator, and then that defines you, like that's you. So social contrivance, like what a lack of credibility that is, but it's a highly curated, controlled state that you defer to, right? So it's not natural at all. It's not a very credible basis, first of all. Right, the lowest form of thought, even anti-thought, as I call it. A lot of ego kind of element, not objective, not standard-based. Very arbitrary, self-insistent. So you take that away, then what value basis is there? Right, rather than the selfishness of ego, you might feel compelled in amalgam theory or otherwise.